Hey everybody, welcome back to COVID Chronicles. I'm Deirdre Oakley and I'm here with my special guest, Mr. George Greenidge Jr. George is a PhD student in sociology and African American studies. Say hey, George.
Hey, everybody, what's up? Good to be here. Thank you for having me today.
Uh, and he's doing his dissertation. This is really interesting stuff. He's doing his dissertation on how economic development and gentrification, which you see all over Atlanta, how it's impacting Black-owned businesses, particularly in terms of things like making the rent too high so they can't survive, or just being literally displaced by developers. Anyway, he is a graduate of Morehouse College, and then he went back to Boston, where he's from, Boston, Cambridge area, and ended up getting a degree in human development and psychology, particularly looking at minority adolescent risk and resilience factors, and worked in the nonprofit sector for a number of years before coming back here
That's right.
to get his graduate degree, his
There's too
PhD.
much snow in Boston, Dr. Oakley. There's too much snow. And I missed Atlanta. So I had to come back.
I actually miss Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts too. So anyway, George also has a lot of experience in community organizing. He's the founder and director of the Greatest Minds Society here at Georgia State, and now they're doing things with the mayoral race in Boston as well. So without further ado, let's just get to it. So George, you have a new blog which is launching tomorrow,
Yes.
Martin Luther King holiday celebration.
Right.
Uh, called Black Dreams Matters 2.
Right.
And your first one is really interesting. I'm not going to give a lot away because I want you to talk about it, but it basically, shows how or illustrates how systemic racism in this country for Black and brown families is intergenerational. And you tell stories about your family um, throughout several generations about what they experienced. So why don't you just take it from here and talk about it some more?
Thank you so much. And I'm glad to be here. And I'm so glad to be a part of these COVID Chronicle specials that are going to be here at Georgia State, sharing with students and also the community about how people and especially communities of colors are facing the realities of COVID and what it actually is happening to their lives. And it's very interesting with the recent deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery. It put us back in the front of the work of the Black Lives Matter work that the younger students and the organizers have been organizing around this country. And it puts back in front about the inequities that have been happening in this country for years. And it's one thing I always say, it's so interesting that Black Lives Matter emerged under the President Obama administration when you had a Black president and a Eric Holder as well, where um, where young people were out there documenting the injustices of what was going on in our country. And before, we've always heard it through the whispers of our families, meaning that our grandmothers and our grandfathers and great grandfathers and aunts would tell us all these stories about injustices. But now we have the power of the cell phone and we document them with video as evidence, and still we're getting the same kind of treatment of, oh, that's not true, that's not really what happened. And so the powerful piece about Black Lives Matter and the young people before that is bringing that back to the forefront. And one thing I want to make sure that we all realize is that this has been a part of the movement. This is all a part of the same movement. And it's interesting. There are some scholars that call it the long movement, where this has been the minute that we got off and were enslaved and brought in chains of this country. The minute that someone kind of picked up and punched a slave master or try to wrestle, that was all a part of the movement. And this is all continuation. But also we look at the institutional racism and systematic racism, about police brutality, about gentrification, about the education that individuals receive in public education, our access to wealth, and also mass incarceration.
Well,
And
it's baked into everything in our society. So it's
everything, it's
everything.
there. And the ways that I wanted to start telling it was through generational stories. And it's very interesting how you get these stories out of your parents and your friends and your family, is that, you know, you have to listen, and it pops out very bits and pieces at all times. And so when I would talk to my grandmother and her sister, my grandfather was George Reginald Markinson. Actually, he is featured in this brand new book that just came out. He was one of the first African-American poets. This book just came out, and he's on page 117 by Kevin Young. But it talked about him, my great-great-grandfather, who came from St. Kitts, George Reginald Markinson. I'm George Reginald Greenidge, named after him. But about him coming back, and he was very, very educated in St. Kitts. He was biracial, and he was able to get a great education. And when he came over after the plantations dried up to New York and Boston, he decided to write his poetry. And his poetry was very well received. It was in many different smaller Black publications. And he moved to the Boston area. But it was interesting when he went to different places to actually, put his work up, it was actually been denied. They were like, "Oh, a Black person don't know how to write that poetry. You know, that you didn't really write that, did you?" You know what I mean? So there was a lot of those kind of pieces as well. But now what lots of different places, especially at Harvard and also at the Schomburg, at Henry Louis Gates's places, that they're highlighting the powerful work of these early warriors that were working together to actually document the Black experience through poetry, music, and dance. And he was pre-Harlem Renaissance. So he was actually mentoring a lot of the younger people in the Harlem Renaissance. That's well documented in stuff in the Schomburg and also the Harvard archives, that he would have these meetings at Harvard University and Harvard Square with other poets sharing each other's poetry. And they have something called the Saturday Quill Post, where they would actually do, we call it Xerox. That's what we call it now, or whatever. They would actually make these documents and pass them out and send them to people. So it's very interesting how now we have the internet. We just put it on a blog and send it out. But, this is very, very, very well organized. But, him not being totally recognized, but now after, post-death, being recognized for his work, that really affected him. You know what I mean? He did have 7 books out, and 7 books. And they're on the internet all over the place and all that. I bought my father one, and he started crying because he remembered all these stories, but it brought back to him what a fantastic writer that his grandfather was. So, those kind of stories are hurt. But I remember my grandmother and her sister telling me those stories growing up about who he was and what kind of work he did. But also that goes into, it goes on to my father's side as well, is that there's and I think you have a slide about this.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yes. So this is, let me just pull this up so everybody can see it. Hang on. Oh, is it letting me share it? No, I think I did something wrong. Just a minute.
But I'll talk about it real quick. Is that here's my great uncle in the 50s, who on my dad's side, his also was named but George. We have a lot of Georges in our family. He worked in the early 50s as a Pullman.
Here's the slide.
Yep, he worked in the Pullman company, which was now pre-Amtrak, pre-Amtrak, post-Amtrak, where he was a car cleaner. And what he decided to do was that he saw a position he's very well liked, very, very, amicable, and a big personality. I don't know where he got that from or I get that from, but a very nice guy. And he was very good friends with everybody there. And then he knew what position was, and he was trying to, make more money for his family. He had 4 girls, and those are my father's first cousins. And they told him no, but he was like, "Wait up, I've been in the company. What do you mean?" They said, "Well, because your race. That's why we said no." And so he went and filed at the MCAD, which was a brand new department out of the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah, tell us what that means.
Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination.
So that was around in the 1950s.
Brand new. I talked to the director over there, and she was like, "This was one of the first cases that they went after." And
so, just one other thing, just so we're clear with our audience, this was this happened before Brown v. Board of Education.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. Definitely. And so he went through the process, and the MCAD actually went in his favor. And so it was really interesting. I heard this story as a kid growing up, but I remember seeing a flyer in Dudley Square in Boston, Roxbury, and there was I was a little bit younger at the time, but they had all these names, and my name had George Greenidge on my name as some of the pioneers, and I'm like, "What is it you talking about?" And then I had to go ask my family members, and they kind of unveiled it a little bit later that, yeah, no, he did something really big. But it's interesting. I'm the king of Google since you're in graduate school. And I Googled, and I saw it was in all the black papers and all across the country. And that Pullman company realized that there are many more lawsuits were coming. And so they opened up the doors for people to be assistant conductors and all these other things on their because of this suit.
Huh.
But the folklore in my family tells me that when they gave him the job, he was like, "No, I don't even want it anyways. Bye, I'm out of here." You know what I mean? I'm sticking with my friends back over here. You made me do all this work. But he was really proud that that he was able to make that happen and so forth.
Okay, let me and just so everybody knows that there's another porter who had just retired, Augustus Johnson, and his wife, and who knows if this had something to do with this porter's holiday, but basically they started having this holiday where 317 porters and their wives were taken on a train for free in the sleeping cars to the annual Porters convention in Los Angeles. So,
and people got to realize, like, I was just looking at this research, this is where black men worked. They worked for in this time. That's where all the jobs were. I know that all the jobs today are at Amazon, but all the jobs were actually with Pullman Company, the kind of well-paying jobs. So we need to realize that as we look at economic disparities, is that this was a really good job for a black man at that time. And it's interesting. I don't know how close this is, but they would always call them Georges. That was their name. You know what I mean? Oh, that's Georges. So I don't know if the company was George Pullman. I'm not sure if I know, but they all call them Georges.
Well, our audience can Google it.
No, they really can.
Yeah, Google it. Best research assistant in the world. I shouldn't be saying that because, like, I'm a professor, but whatever.
But it's interesting. When I shared this story, my mother also shared her own story that she wanted to go fly the friendly skies at 19 years old. And, I showed it to this, and she was like, "You know what, son, I had a heartbreaking experience too. And I never knew you wanted to be a stewardess." She said, "I wanted to be in the skies. That's where it was." And she applied to the school. She has a very, very white sounding name, Paulina Hurd. And she showed up, and they were like, "Nope, we don't take black girls. Sorry." And, you know, she was kind of, you know, devastated by this. She put her money in, she did all the other things, and they told her no. And
Which
so
airline was this?
it wasn't an airline. It was a stewardess training school,
Okay.
but it was in Virginia. And
And this would have been probably in the early 60s,
early
maybe?
60s, right. Early
Okay.
60s.
Yeah. So I think what people have to realize, you already had this major court decision in Brown v. Board of Education. And of course, it took a long time. Well, it still goes on. It goes on a little more quietly um, for, uh, you know, things to change. And, you know, we still have changes that really need to happen. Let me take down this slide. And you know, you have a lot of experience doing community organizing and community work in Black and Brown communities, both up in the Boston area and down here. And why don't you share some experiences, and then, you know, we can, before my last question, we can end on a happy note about Warnock Ossoff and what all you and your
Yeah,
students
well,
did. But don't talk
definitely.
about that. Talk about other things
Well,
first.
you know, I was born in the Boston and Cambridge area. So one thing I was credited is that I was able to have, especially in Cambridge, I grew up around college students and from MIT and Harvard. And a lot of those kids came to our schools and were mentors and were after school um, group leaders. And so, you know, having a college in my backyard was something that I was always used to. Like, you know what I mean? You could go and hear lectures for free if you wanted to, but I was 15. You didn't really want to go to those lectures, but you know what I mean? But, you know, it was something that was just available. They had lots of different programs that were on campus for high school students and all those other things. So those are really some good things that were able to be the process. But in Boston, I was a part of, I started a lot of grassroots organizations. I worked at a foundation called the Boston Foundation, giving out grants to entrepreneurs and social justice organizations. And I also work closely with the Mayor Menino, on the Boston Empowerment Zone, helping to give resources to distressed communities, particularly small businesses and Black businesses in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. But it's also, especially coming from Boston, I think there's some things that we have to kind of put as that these things do exist, like racism, white supremacy, white privilege, and toxic masculinity do exist. And we need to put that out there when we have these discussions about what's going on in our communities. Because as you just seen with the riots at the White House, the Capitol, white privilege was all over that place about, you know what I mean? Compared to 7 months ago, you know, they had every damn color uniform out there, National Guard, Air Force, everybody was out there for the protesters during the Black Lives Matter and things. But here, someone didn't get the memo, or someone pretended they didn't get the memo that, oh, it was okay because they were expressing their freedom of speech rights and so forth. So, you know, Black communities and Black people see this as, wow, this is actually happening right in front of us, that these things do actually happen. And also that Black, Indigenous, and especially women of color, are most affected by social injustices. We have to really kind of put that back up there and realize that, you know, and very proud of the work of many of the young sisters and older sisters here in Georgia that organized with Sister Stacey Abrams about getting the Black vote out, and really doing some really great work. And so we need to really lift that up and really make people really understand what else is going on inside of our society. But also, we also know that, you know, when I was in the foundation field, that, you know, Black communities and Black organizations are very are not funded as well as the white organizations. And you look in Boston, they have a recent report by the Federal Reserve Bank, is that for a Black family, I think they have African American family, they have an $8 worth of savings and worth in Boston compared to a white family, which has $160,000 or $170,000 worth of savings. And so you look at that and you say, wow, here you are supposed to compete about, you're saying, well, you should get more donors. You know what I mean? Black people, you should have more individual donors for your organization. Why don't you have that? And you look at these disparities that the Federal Reserve just put out, and you're like, this is unrealistic. You know what I mean? You're putting all these different aspects on these Black organizations, and you're not really supporting them. But it's interesting right now is that there's been a lot of push after the death of George Floyd by corporations and foundations and also city organizations to start looking at the imbalance of resources and power. There are a lot of these new diversity, equity, and belonging positions that are popping up all over. But, and I think even at Georgia State, we might have a new vice president of all that as well coming forward. But, you know, I think everybody, and I think the people that at Georgia State and some of the professors and staff are like, usually those positions historically, it's just a figurehead. They don't have a budget. They don't have a staff, and they just sit in meetings and push papers around. And so where you have the question about what teeth does that Prachi position have? And so these are the questions that keep on coming up. But lastly, you know, I think there was a recent, I looked up some stuff and I realized that Adia Harvey Wingfield just came out with a new book called Race, Work, and Healthcare in the New Economy, which she coined this term called racial outsourcing, which explains about what's going on in the healthcare field, about here are all these nurses and these doctors that are on these kind of like, okay, we're going to hire Black nurses and doctors, but guess where you're going to work? You're going to work just in the Black community. So here you are, the thing, well, we're doing all this kind of hiring and all these numbers are up and all that, but here they're actually being deployed as in the areas of doing the most hardest work. And the racial outsourcing term, which she coined, takes a look at that in her new book about who does why aren't the white nurses and doctors also deployed in those areas? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have a long history of that in terms of the segregation of hospitals. I've been reading this book, Public Policy in the Black Hospital. Hospitals were segregated. And, you know, I mean, the 1918 flu pandemic, the Black hospitals were under-resourced, and Black people who got sick couldn't get into the white hospitals, or they were put in the basement. And then the other thing that I read about Black nurses, which is interesting after you're talking about this today, is that the Red Cross during World War I desperately needed nurses. And the Black nurses wanted to enlist. And the Red Cross was like, no, no, no. I mean, Black men could enlist, I think over 700,000 enlisted in the war. And finally, in the end, under pressure, they enlisted 8 nurses.
Oh, Jesus.
8. And those nurses became famous, but because they were the 8. But it's to me, because I'm really interested in history. It's just it keeps on coming up in different forms. Why don't you talk
just real quick about, you know, just the Harvey Wingfield's book, you know, as we see neoliberalism and companies now using labor with costs being cut and shifts going overseas, how does that affect, as she states, about people's retirement, about just, you know, the care of their workers, their environment, you know, here are all these people traveling nurses. What about their families? How do they pick them up, bring them with them? I mean, it's a whole discussion that needs to be looked at about, here we are, waving and celebrating the flag that we hired all these Black and doctors and nurses, but at what cost to family life, economics, and so forth.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, I don't know. I haven't read Adia's book yet. It did win a big award. I think it won the C. Wright Mills Award. But you also have to think about, well, okay, what's the pension system?
Yeah.
They're healthcare workers, but what's their healthcare benefits like?
Yeah.
Because if you outsource
all
of that, you're more likely to just not get those sort of benefits, which so
Yeah.
it's cheaper. So I'm very cynical about all of these corporations jumping on the bad bandwagon of diversity and all these things. I think Apple just announced another initiative because it's operating within, I mean, we live in a capitalist society. This is operating within capitalism. And even if there's some well-intentioned
Yeah.
programs there, they still have to operate within this framework of the companies. Their number one goal is to make a profit. So, time will tell.
Yeah, and then also, and this whole stuff around COVID and just watching Black communities and all communities, and specifically Black communities, the ones I'm in, are able to, cope with this, and I just watched the phenomenon of everyone looking to who is the patient zero in their family, or who's the patient zero in the neighborhood, and it reminds me of the horrible story of Typhoid Mary.
Oh, yes.
And how we are in society we're trying to find who patient zero is and just, who gave it to us or who spread it to us and all that. And just the whole story about her life as someone that was asymptomatic, allegedly asymptomatic, let me say that. But here she was, put in isolation for at least 15 or 20 years of her life. To live on an island because of her symptom status, because she still didn't believe that they were saying that this was all about her. But just the way that we are running around, I'm scared of all the things we didn't know about HIV and AIDS in the 80s. We heard.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I was around back then. I remember it's all about gay men. And then there was the kissing scandal on Dynasty with Rock Hudson.
Yes. So all these things about how diseases are spread, and we're going to learn in the next 5 years how many of these were we just hunches, or were these just things that we were learning? But it's gotten into all of our psyche about we are wearing masks, we are social distancing, most of us. We just saw it was in Alabama where they won a game and there were over 20,000 people, because people are sick of being in the house. But this is the whole thing about us in sociology, about understanding group behavior. Why was that a time to celebrate or was it not? Why?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't. Previously, I think you and I talked about this when Ohio State had won the game before they played Bama. The same thing happened at Ohio State. But let's go back to just I think our students would be really interested in hearing about the mobilization through the Greatest Mind Society, about what you and your students did to get the vote out for Warnoff and Ossoff.
Yeah. Well, one thing we realized, we. By the way, he is a classmate of mine at Morehouse College. We were in classes together. We had 4 classes together.
I didn't know that.
Yes. We were same classes. We were all in classes with 8 to 10 people in our major. So he was in.
Oh, wow.
But it's really also thoughtful just to think about I knew that there were many different people targeting different communities. May it be pieces in the West End, may it be in Columbus, Georgia. But I sat back and said, we have 50,000 students at Georgia State. Why don't we just do a voter campaign with students in the front on mobilization through social media about mobilizing these students to go out and vote, especially during a special election. And so I grabbed a group of us, we got our iPhones out, and I've got pretty good at Canva lately, and all of us. And we just sat there, took pictures one day, got a bunch of pizza, and just sat there and sat in the room and organized. And then we said, you know what, let's put it on all our social media campaigns. There were 10 to 15 of us that did this for 5 to 7 days. And we just kept on ordering good pizza and having great coffee at a place called Social Market around the corner. And we met there and we said, let's just do this. This is our public service. And it was interesting, especially on the GroupMe's and also the Instagram, major, is that there was conversation going on. It was like, where's my voting poll again? And so we would put the information back in there. So mind you, these GroupMe's have 3,000 to 5,000 students on there. And so they would see pictures of people they saw on campus saying, you know what, I need to go ahead and do this because I just saw 5 or 6 or 7 people that I know are doing this. So it became in there. And so students would take pictures with their I voted sticker and put it back in the thing. So it became this really kind of warm piece. So I'm really glad that a lot of students stepped up to that. I'm really proud that the organization that we did. And now Georgia's blue. And we have to say that a lot of our Georgians and a lot of our students and also the Black community helped save this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So why don't we get to, this is, this course is about how COVID-19 is linked to systemic racism, but obviously, systemic racism is everywhere. And you know it as much as I do, we're both urbanists, that cities are rife with systemic racism. It's built into the built environment. Everywhere. Who has what jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But really, given everything that's gone on, which of course, with the Trump presidency, we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple days, but the insurrection at the Capitol, how can we eliminate racism from our social institutions? Considering, part of the theme of today, talking to you, is it's intergenerational in terms of people's lived experiences.
Yep.
So how can we eliminate this? What can we do?
Well, you have to figure out different strategies to have people be able to call it out and name it. And so when it's talking about people of color and policies that affect them, maybe we should have the people of color talk first and frame the problem and frame the issue, and have people that are not in that group talk after. There are many different little ways that we can do in our work in the society to do that. How do we do a racial lens approach about looking at, there's different foundations out there that say, we only give to organizations that have $1 million budgets. What does that say?
But how do you do that? How do you do that in a system that's white privileged?
Exactly. You know what I mean? So those are some of the things, these inbred policies that are written in organizations and also city policies about who they give contracts to. Who has the capacity building to actually carry through the contract. You know what I mean? So these, who has the, if we're going to give you a contract, you're going to have at least $50,000 on your books, that you're able to cover the contract, because we're going to be paying you every other month. So you better have enough upfront cash, which maybe a lot of these smaller mom and pop organizations that are looking for smaller food contracts might not have. So you got to look at all these policies and say, um, what's the racial lens on this? I remember I worked in one organization and there was a secretary who was in charge of ordering the food. And she told me one day that, oh, I don't talk to the Latino group or the African groups because I don't understand what they're talking about on the phone. So I don't understand them. So I don't use them as a contractor for food. And I said, well, you got to realize, and I brought it to the manager. I was like, you got to realize that that power is inside of our organization. Here's a person that is the manager and secretary of food ordering. And she says, I'll just give it to Panera Bread. You know what I mean? Because I can't understand I can't understand the guy because he has an accent. So we kind of have to look at the micro level and also the macro level.
And so do you think that we can reform our existing systems, or do they have to be abolished?
No, I think it has to be reformed, but you have to use a place where people are able to share that experience. Like she just told me flat out, well, I don't understand. I can't understand them. Well, so they're a Boston-based organization. You know what I mean? They're a company that's on the list, but you chose because you're not comfortable with hearing people with an accent not to choose them. So how does that go on when people look at job applications? I don't know how to pronounce somebody from Africa's name or an Indian guy's name. So
no, I mean that there's been studies done that there's discrimination in housing markets and labor markets based not only on your name.
Code.
What?
Zip code as well. Up.
Oh yeah, zip code, territorial stigma. It's called, and so, but yeah, I mean, so it accents, but then all these other things too, and I actually get I didn't this time, but I normally get calls from people volunteering for getting people out to the vote. Do I need a ride to the voting polls? And the first time that happened, I was like, what? No, I can get there myself. And so somehow I've gotten on some list. This is a different kind of thing, but I got gotten on some list because of my name.
Oh yeah.
Because Deirdre Oakley could be a black name.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think the second time it happened to me, I was like, look, I can drive people to the polls. Do you need help? I mean, but yeah, that's.
I thought you were black too.
Yeah. But okay.
You're a soul sister at heart, all right?
Oh yeah. So anyway, I think that I mean, is there anything else you want to say as we wrap this up?
No, I think these are very trying times, and there's an article that's just in the Boston Globe today. I was going to send it to you about people moving in the area and being ambiguous, and how some people are very methodical about how their 5-year plan is, their year plan, and how this is all thrown out the window. And it's just very trying times as people look at their income, about where they're working, and how they're making decisions, and just daily in their lives about how to walk around and be safe. I feel for a lot of the young kids that are online every day, looking at a screen, which we thought was a good thing 2 years ago, but now we're realizing that kids need to have more interaction with each other than just their brother and their sister and their mother. And I think we're in very trying times. But I think if we collectively talk about it and not scared to have those conversations, I think we can get some really good solutions out of there. But, we can't get isolated and get in our little areas and be like, this is how it is. We have to talk. We have to use the technology that we have with us. It's interesting. This one kid couldn't get on a Zoom call because they didn't have the technology. But I said, come on, y'all, think about it. And they realized they both had Instagram. So Instagram.
Oh.
So I had to get your people to start thinking about different ways. Oh, everyone might not have a Zoom account or a WebEx account, but you can have a group conversation now on Instagram. This thing called Clubhouse, which people are getting together. So we have to get really creative. And sometimes we're going to have to meet the young people where they're at. Maybe we should have classes in Clubhouse. That's where all the kids are.
Yeah.
So we got to really think. We got to really think about, where they're at, and meet them where they're at, and start having that conversation.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, George. Everybody, George Greenidge Jr. I have one trivia question. Your middle name is Reginald. Okay, so George Greenidge, C. Greenidge, who was the porter, what was his middle name?
There was one named Acosta. I had it earlier. It's Chester.
Chester. Okay.
Yeah, it was Chester.
That's just a trivia little thing. So anyway, I'll sign out because I know you need to get over to the King.
Yeah, we got a bunch of students. They're all calling me right now. They're like, where are you at?
All right. So thanks a lot, Jordan. I'll see you later.
Thank you. Good luck on this project. And please let me know any way I can help.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.